north. Up north, people start their plants indoors 2 or 3 weeks early so that they can beat the frost or whatever. Not a problem I've ever seen. But for a photoperiod plant, you can indoors trick it over and over again. Most photoperiod plants will flower in under 60 or 70 days. And so a photoperiod plant, you could in theory harvest, I don't know, 4 or 5 times a year indoors, or just once outdoors. Whereas other plants will just continue to flower all year long. For example, there's determinate and indeterminate tomatoes. Where a determinate one flowers very similar to a photoperiod. It'll wait and then flower a bunch of flowers. Whereas an indeterminate, this one will continuously flower. It's more of a long vine structure, and will continuously flower all year. It'll be like, here's a tomato, instead of here's 100 tomatoes. And I personally like these more. I planted this once, but I didn't know what to do with 100 tomatoes. I tried canning it, but I don't like canned tomatoes. So. But yeah, the plants you use can definitely vary. I would definitely look in at least a little bit into the plant that you're interested in growing. Like, there's a lot of books like Texas Organic Gardening is a really, really good book I can suggest. It has, like, I want to say 100 or so plants that grow here locally, and all the information you want about, you know, how to take care of them and their pests and stuff. Outdoors, you always have to worry about pests, sadly. I never realized how bad it could be until I saw a tomato grower just run through a tomato in like 10 seconds. I was like, wow, you just destroyed that. It was horrible. But yeah, it's an exciting new world, especially just the crazy amounts of water and stuff you can save. To me, that's the biggest thing, like, as far as for the world. Like, saving 95% of the water you use every time is really important.
How far do you fill that from there?
This one I normally fill up to about this breaking point here, which is about 8 gallons. It will hold technically up to about 12 or 14, but I normally fill mine to about here because I have pumps circulating onto them directly to keep them wet. If you were going to have the nets just sitting there with this type of system without the pump, I'd probably fill it just a little higher so that the water level is just underneath them. You don't want this to be wet all the time, but the plant's roots reaching in will drag water up and keep it slightly moist, because the roots themselves are just transpiring water up through their system.
So you're using like the humidity of the water, like between the water level and the plant?
Yeah, well, in the beginning, that's how they're getting by. When they're just rooting in the basic system, the deep water culture, it's just the humidity underneath there that's reaching them, and they feel the wetness down there, and so they reach for it. So basically, when you have this type of system, they're no longer doing that, and you can notice very, very different root structure growth. If you're growing in a traditional deep water culture, you'll see long, stringy roots reaching down into the pile, whereas when you're running tubing that's pumping water into it, you'll see just hundreds and hundreds of small roots coming out of all sides, because it's like, well, I'm not going anywhere, I just need more root surface. And so it's much stronger for it to have hundreds of short roots than the few long ones in that system. But these systems cost almost twice as much. You can build this entire system for $20, whereas this pump alone is about $16.
So you have tubes running into the little baskets themselves?
Yeah, see, let me show you. From this thing, I would simply hook on a piece of this. I would determine how long I need it to be, snip it there, and tie it back over with one of those zip ties to keep it locked. That way no water would be escaping here. You then use either like a knife, or they make specially made plungy tools for like 99 cents, and you just plunge a hole into the tubing, and you put the feeder tube in, and now I have this T-tube in, and I can put 2 separate lines for 2 different pots. And then here with this drip, the reason I like to use heads is because the heads click into these little net pots perfectly and just hang there, so that they never come out. Even the other ones work this way, the misters. So it's really...
So you're misting water directly into...
Yeah, with this methodology, you're literally... Well, this one drips, but with the other heads that I have at home, they mist. I should have brought some of those too. They're just orange and ever so slightly different. But with either one, you're directly applying it into the net cup. And those, you see faster growth. The passive system, where it's just eventually reaching towards the water, it grows quicker than this system, which grows quicker than normal, seed growth in a pot. But the fastest growth by far is by automatically pumping them all the water they could ever dream of using, because it won't affect anything after enough roots have gotten down. So 24 days in, 30 days in, there's no difference. But for those first 24 days, you notice a massive difference. when I first put these together, I put together two, one with a pump and one without, because that's two poured. I poured both, and then one group of tomatoes grew to say about that tall, while the other ones had grown almost a whole foot taller, and just from that extra access to water in the first 24 days. But
and
it's not necessary; it's just better.
And you would need to have like a stake or something for them to grow up on? Or?
Yeah, for tomatoes, what I ended up doing is I had a piece of wood here that had stakes attached to it. They were in between each setup, and I ran twist ties between them, or we call them zip ties between them, to make like a firm lattice structure for them all to interline through. I wanted to buy those tomato rack things, but they would have worked better on a circular foundation and not this dense. Because they were this dense, I had to have something they could all grow through unitedly. But it really works out to build in this dense. If you have the space, don't get me wrong, sure, the more space the merrier. But you can, if you're limited on space, by adding density, you can really, really up your total production. I have lids like this where I have an extra 2 holes drilled and there's 8 instead of 6. And sometimes there I have a problem with them trying to strangle each other out and try and blind the other one from the light. But in general, I'll not have many problems and it'll yield more of whatever kinds of foods you're putting in. It's, should have brought a bottle of water.
The nutrient solution, how often do you put it? What is the solution? Where can we get it?
Well, what I use is I just use, what I'm using right now is called Biomechanical, and I ordered that off the internet. And anything you get from the Walmart will work. You want stuff that's liquid mostly, because liquid dissolves better in liquid. There's some crystalline ones where it's like a powder that you pour in that'll work too. Basically anything will work in these systems, as long as it's not like a steak. You don't want to take those little steaks and just throw them in there and hope they dissolve. That's not the best method. But besides that, anything will work in here. The ones I'm using are I ordered off the internet because they're completely organic. That way everything is organic from the get-go. Even in these kinds of systems, you can be completely organic. And like so, instead of trying to fight fungus with fungicide, I use hydrogen peroxide in the water. Use like a tablespoon of hydrogen peroxide per gallon, and all of a sudden you can't have fungi or algae growing. And then by using the organic fertilizers, you can really taste the difference in the food. Like an organic tomato is good. Just slice it up, a little salt.
What about the pH balance of the water?
The pH, all right. Now, the way I first started dealing with that is I just went to the water mill. All those little water mill things pH their water to exactly 5.5, which is ever so slightly low, just a hair low. Most plants like between 5.8 and 7.0. But in general, I had never seen a plant complain about the 5.5 just as is. But then eventually I jumped and spent the $20 order off the internet one of these kits. You can get them at Home Depot now even. But this one was from the internet. This is General Hydroponics pH tester kit. And basically, you take this little tube, and you scoop up some water, you put 5 dots of this in, you put on the lid, you shake it all up, and it'll tell you the pH as a color as compared to this chart here, so you'll know that you have a 5.8, and then you need to add more or whatever. And for like the $20, it came with pH up, pH down, and the tester. And I bring the pH down because it's acid. I don't want to bring that to the school. But pH up is just an alkaline base. I don't know exactly what they use for this one, but potassium carbonate. But yeah, so if the pH was slightly off, you could just adjust it with this. That's what I started doing once I got reverse osmosis system. My mom did rather. I started getting water from her place, and her pH was ever so slightly low because it was just RO-ing tap water. So now I adjust it ever so slightly.
So using a higher pH wouldn't be recommended?
No, I mean, you want to stay between the 5.8 and 7. The thing is, there's a spectrum of all these different, your main 3 fertilizers are NPK, but you actually have 15 total nutrients and minerals that most plants care about. And in the pH spectrum between 1 and 14, you'll have locking values. So here at about 5.8 to 7, you have between 75% and 100% absorption of all. Between 75% absorption and 100% absorption of most of the 15. Whereas as soon as you start straying outward to here, you get between 75 and 75, and then going higher here, you go between 50 and 75. So it all starts going out of whack once you start stepping out of this general zone. It varies for plants, sometimes between 1 and 2 pH. I think coconut trees, for example, like a slightly more acidic solution. But for most fruits and vegetables, you're going to want to be between 5.8 and 7.0. 5.8, 7.0, which is actually slightly more acidic than you would want them in soil. In soil, you want them between 6.5, 7.5. But in these systems, for some reason, they grow better with an ever so slightly more acidic formula. I'm not entirely sure the reasoning for that. I read it many times in many books. And it seems to be true every time I get lazy and let my pH start to get real crazy. Like if you have very, very densely packed plants, like in a system like this, they'll frequently want to take all of one particular type of fertilizer out of it. So say they've taken all the nitrogen out, and all of a sudden the pH will change. So I've seen they themselves modify the pH up to a whole point or a point and a half one time, but that was in mid of a very awesome blooming of tomatoes. But in general, they can suffer up to 2 or 3 points in either direction. Anything more than that, and they'll become just locked out and start dying. But anywhere in that range, between, say, 4.5 and 8.5, they'll survive. But they'll do their best growth at 8.5 to 7.0. So while this is not technically required, it is one of those optional things that is pretty worth it once you start actually getting kind of serious about it. When you're first playing around, it's fine. But once you start getting a little serious about it, it's worth getting. And this has lasted me forever. This kit, I think I bought this in 2008, and I'm almost halfway done. Almost.
So once you get it at a 7.0, do you have to maintain it at a 7? Does it drop?
It'll drop or raise depending on the plant and the nutrient solution. For example, the Botanicare fertilizers I use is a part A, part B. So part of the fertilizers are in one, part of the fertilizers are in the other, and you mix how you want it. So normally plants have their NPK values, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, NPK. And early on when a plant is vegging, doing green growth, you're going to want a lot of nitrogen, say 15, 10, something like that, or maybe 5, 10, depending on the plant. And these are going to be the kinds of fertilizer layouts you're looking for on the fertilizers. On the bottles, they'll tell you NPK 15, 10, 10, or 5, 5, 5. And if it's lower, it's fine, because you can always just add more to get to these higher numbers. And then for a flowering plant, that's a plant actually blooming, flowering, you want it the exact opposite. You want about 5, 15, 15, which is traditionally what a rose fertilizer is. Many rose fertilizers are good flowering fertilizers. Rose is a flower, shockingly enough. But yeah, this tends to be just about right for most flowers, because nitrogen is used in building up green cellulose matter, but for building what most plants would consider their flowering or sexual organs, you need the other two in higher doses. You still need some of either. Like, I've tried putting just a straight nitrogen in before during their growth. I was like, oh, turbocharging them. They started showing all these deficiencies. Their leaves were burning on the edges. They were like, help me, I need potassium. And when you, especially potassium, when you're low on potassium, you have a vulnerability to bugs and fungus. And most plants have at least 1 or 2 bugs or fungus that are out to get them, including Rhotosis blight, which is out to get every plant.
Okay. Are there any helpful organisms that you can talk about, like anything in general?
In general? Well, I mean, helpful organisms, ladybugs are always helpful, of course. Anytime you have a problem with like aphids or spider mites or any horrible little creepy crawlies, letting loose ladybugs will go in and attack them. You can also use, they're called assassin wasps, but I wouldn't get into the wasp world. I myself am allergic to wasps, so I'm deadly afraid. But both of those are bugs that hunt other bugs. Spiders, of course, never kill a spider in your garden. He's on your side. But as far as negative things to look for, you want to look for what looks like dense spider webbing in the plant. That's a spider mite. It's not a real spider. A spider will make its catching web, not be webbing up a plant.
What happens? What if you find one of those particular?
The best way to remove it is to just get like some duct tape on your hand and remove netting from the plant, and then from there it should also have caught a lot of the little mites. And spray the area or put a fan on it. I've noticed it's very hard for them to keep hold of any plant when they have a strong gust from like an oscillating fan. They'll try and hold on without the webbing, and with the fan on them, it's like, oh, help me, Jesus, and they're gone. Wow. And it's probably the biggest problem you'll have if you grow indoors is spider mites. They're god-awful annoying. I've had problems twice in the last 10 years with them. I'm I'm very religious about this. Like the spare bedroom we use, we used to like sterilize the walls with a chlorine mix and everything. You're like, perfect. And then, but some people have problems if they don't take care of the hygiene of the room with like rhotosis blight, powdery mildew, false mildew, downy mildew, all sorts of bacteria-based and fungi-based problems. But I've literally never seen a problem like that in outdoors or indoors. I think the high heat in the valley also helps to protect against a lot of these fungus. These fungus tend to like a cool, damp temperature.
Right. Why don't we take a short break for a bit, and then we can come back to it.